Not yet. Almost. All right, welcome everyone to the Shakopee City Council meeting on March 17th tonight. Ms. Weckman, please call the roll.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Lehman.
Here.
Councilmember Mokel.
Here.
Councilmember Luce.
Here.
Councilmember Whiting.
Here.
Mayor Tabke.
Here. All stand for the pledge. We've got a troop here to do the pledge with us this evening. You guys can come up. And just line up right up here so everybody can see you.
Flag back there, do we?
No, we don't, actually. You're right. All right, now you guys can turn around to the flag. Sorry. Now you showed off for the camera. And you can start whenever you want to.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks, guys.
All right, moving on to item number 3, approval of the agenda. Do we have any additions or corrections to the agenda this evening? Ms. Wilson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, staff has 2 agenda items on the table that are additions to the agenda. 10D1 approves a revised job description for the position of recreation supervisor. And 11A takes us into closed session to discuss labor negotiation strategy.
All right, so we've got an addition of 10D1 and 11A. Councilor Whiting?
Mr. Mayor, I'll offer the agenda as presented with a request to move 10D1 to the consent agenda on our next discussion.
All right, do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
Second by Councilor Mokel. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Now we're going to move on to item number 4, consent business. Councilor Lehman.
I'll move to add 10D1 to the consent agenda.
All right. 10D1 to consent. Anything else? Councilor Luce.
I would like to have F4 taken off.
F4 taken off. Okay. I would also like to remove C2 as well. So thus far we've added 10D1, removed F4 and C2. Councilor Lehman.
Make a motion to approve the modified consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Luce. Ms. Wilson, could you please read the consent business?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Item 4A1 adopts ordinance number 903, amending the city code to make utility structures conditional uses in multiple zones. 4B1 declares 2 forfeited vehicles held by the police department as surplus property and authorizes proper sale or disposal of these vehicles. 4B2 declares 17 firearms and 5 optics held by the police department as surplus property and authorizes proper disposal of these items. 4C1 authorizes the purchase of a cab and chassis from Asselford Equipment, Inc. in the amount of $47,141 and authorizes the purchase of a refuse packer with accessories from Mac Queen Equipment, Inc. in the amount of $58,827.20 with trade-in for a total of $105,968.20 to be paid from the Capital Equipment Internal Service Fund. 4C2 was removed from consent. 4F1 approves the payment of bills and electronic transfers in the amount of $1,429,466.68. 4F2 approves the minutes of the February 17th and March 3rd, 2015 meetings. 4F3 adopts resolution number 7561, approving an interfund loan and transfer from the Equipment Fund to the Economic Development Authority for the purchase of land from MnDOT. 4F4 was removed from consent, and 10D1 was added to consent. That item approves a revised job description for the position of recreation supervisor.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on those items? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Move on to item number 5, recognition of involved citizens by City Council. If there's anyone here who would like to discuss an item that is not on the agenda this evening. Now is the time, you're limited to 5 minutes, and we would love to hear from you. All right, seeing none, we're going to move on to item number 7, which is business removed from consent agenda discussed at this time. We'll start with C2 that I pulled off, ordering Hilldale Drive Improvement Project number 2014-3. I wanted to pull this off for 2 reasons. One, that I do not think it's right for the city to pay $126,000 of cost to homeowners when it benefits 10 lots. I think the project is a very good project, but I very much don't agree with spending $126,000 on this item, as we discussed and I promoted last time. I think we have a really good option in front of us, which was the second option that staff put forward, and that was to reconstruct the street, install the sewer, and just put the water line through and not connect all the houses to water lines. It doesn't end up costing the city money in the same way that the option that we're currently considering does. And I don't think it's right to make the entire city to pay for 10 homes for $126,000 when there's a good option of just letting them stay on their wells and not having to incur that expense. So that is just my feelings on that. And this item does need four votes to pass council. So I'd like to take it back and look at it again with eliminating the water access to each home from the project. Councilor Whiting.
And we had quite a bit of discussion on this item at the time. The water portion, of course, is something that Spuck handles. And to do all this construction without the opportunity for Spuck to retrieve some of the money that they'll be putting towards this project is problematic for future development of some of these sites that are going to be coming online or hopefully coming online. So, you know, I agreed with you as far as the cost. It's too much for the citizens to pay, but to work this out so that it was a compromise, I thought we did a pretty good job of discussing it. So, you know, I thought I bent a little bit and we came up with something we could all work with.
Councilor Lehman.
Well, first, we don't know that cost is exact number, because once the actual numbers of the project come in, it could be more or less. And the way I read this, I'm not a lawyer, but if the costs come in less than the 28 for the, you know, or if the assessments are less, they're allowed to charge some portion of the fees to get up to the 28 maximum. So there is a potential for that number to be substantially less, depending on what the costs are to actually do the construction. On top of that, my feeling is, you know, we didn't have a problem taking taxpayer money and giving it to a wealthy individual that bought a pet store, $100,000, which benefited, you know, one person. And this has got the opportunity to make sure that the high-risk area of groundwater contamination is removed from that risk pool. So I think there's a lot of good things in this agreement.
Okay. Councilor Luce.
In a perfect world, I'd agree with you. You know, I'd like to see the water lines in, and so they could hook up to them when they need to. But I can't speak for Spuck, and they don't want to put the water lines in and incur the costs. That's the way we got to do it then.
And I will say we came to an agreement, and for 4 of us to agree, I think that was where we came down, so.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. I just want to vote against it because I don't agree. So
Oh.
that's why I
consistent.
can't stay on consent. Yeah.
Last night, I did mention we'd be talking about this, and we haven't had that discussion with Spuck, and they understand that discussion will be coming. And although it is still the ratepayers and the citizens of Shakopee paying for it, it will be some sort of shared costs in the end. I'm quite certain.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't. After our meeting last time, I talked to quite a few of the homeowners who were out there, and the general feeling out there was that sewer was something that's very important to them to get in, but there are very few people who cared significantly about the water, and so that's what continued me on that path, because it would be cheaper for them to do it without connecting each house to water and go from there. So if anybody has a motion, Councilor Whiting.
I'll move to adopt Resolution 7559, a resolution ordering an improvement and preparation of plans and specifications for Hilldale Drive sanitary sewer and water improvements, project number 2014-3. Also to approve the draft agreement on assessments and charges to benefiting properties.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Councilor Mokel, discussion. Seeing none, all's in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Myself. Passes 4-1 with, I almost said Councilor Lehman in dissent. That was autopilot right there. Mayor Tabke in dissent. All right, item, next one that we pulled off was F4, adoption of city council norms and behaviors. Councilor Luce.
I basically can't vote for something that I can't believe that everybody's going to keep, so if we're not going to abide by it, there's no sense in voting on it.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Make a
And then we
motion
can
to-
discuss. Councilor Mokel?
I'll make a motion to move to adopt the above agreed upon norms for behavior for elected officials of the city of Shakopee.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Councilor Whiting. Is there anything you'd like to talk about changing in it that would make sense, or
We'd have to redo the whole thing. I think the whole process was bad.
how so?
Just think it was bad. There's no sense in explaining it.
Well, we'd all like to, we went through the process to try and get the whole group to work better together, and we can't understand what the problem is if we don't know. And this is the only time we get to talk about these things. And if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine.
Leave it lay.
Okay, Councilor Whiting.
You know, I think these are common courtesy, bare bones rules to kind of move forward with, put things in the past and try and work together better as a team. And for myself, talking about me, I believe that, you know, there there's things that I need to do better on this list, and I plan on working on it, and that's all I can hope for, and I'm gonna hope the same from the rest of you. So.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Passes 4-1 with Councilor Luce in dissent. All right, we move on to item number 8, recess for Economic Development Authority meeting. Do we have a motion to recess for Economic Development? Councilor Lehman.
Motion to recess to Economic Development Authority meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Whiting. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. President Mokel, it's your meeting.
I'd like to call the meeting of the EDA to order. Would you please note the roll, Ms. Weckman?
Yes, Madam President.
Okay. Do I have an approval of the agenda? Mr. Lehman.
Motion to approve the agenda.
And a second?
Second. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Whiting. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously. And consent business. Do I have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Any- Okay.
Second.
Second by Mr. Whiting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously. No, there's no general business, so motion to adjourn to Tuesday, April 27th,
No, there's
2015.
Oh, we'll approve that on the consent.
Oh, 31st? March 31st, 2015.
was item 3C and 3D on consent also.
Yep.
Yeah, they're marked on your pages.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn? Mr. Lehman,
Motion to
Second.
adjourn to April 21st,
at March 31st, I guess.
March 31st.
Second.
March
Seconded by
31st.
No,
Mr. Luce.
Oh, this is March 31st.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Let's get our dates right. 31st?
Sam is the one who's telling me 31st over there.
Madam President and EDA members, we have called a public hearing on a tax increment financing request
Okay.
for Tuesday, March 31st, which has already been called as a city council meeting. So this would add an EDA meeting on that same evening.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously.
All right, we reconvene the Shakopee City Council meeting and move on to item number 10A1, rezoning CUP and allow overheight structures and preliminary and final plat of RAR First Edition.
Mr. Leek.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I'm going to deviate from the contents of the report because I know you've all read it and it's long and I don't want to enter it all into the record since it's already there. A few procedural things. You have in front of you a request for action on 4 items. One is to rezone property which is currently guided mixed use and zoned highway business, or B1, to I2 heavy industrial. You have a request for a conditional use permit for an overheight structure, and I've got on the overhead camera one of the documents that's in your packet showing the approximate layout of the proposed 78 to 80,000 square foot warehouse, and that structure is on the north side of the property, and overheight structures do require a CUP. You also have a preliminary and a final plat in front of you. As you know, these are several parcels. They were acquired by RAR. They are now platting them into a single parcel for this project. So you have one resolution in front of you containing all of those actions. It's Resolution 7560. And at the Planning Commission, the public hearing was held on the rezoning request, the CUP, the preliminary plat. For those who are watching, preliminary plat public hearings are before the Planning Commission here in Shakopee. They come forward to the City Council. The Planning Commission does not see the final plat. Again, this is all related to a proposal for a 78 to 80,000 square foot warehouse that is fueled by the growth and expansion at RAR. And I see that Jesse Tice, the CEO of RAR, is here if you have any questions for them. Again, the Planning Commission did recommend approval. You will have seen in the draft conditions a number of items that relate to public improvements that would be installed by the developer of this project as a part of a developer's agreement. And what I've got overhead, and both I and Mr. Loney can address in some more detail, relates to that. In the initial plan that RAR provided, there was an access which the county did not find acceptable on County Road 69. RAR and the county staff met and they came up with a proposal for an access that would come over to Scott Street and provide access rather than in the area of Apgar, which was originally the case. Staff from the city met with the county as well, and the more specific solution that we came up with was to retain the existing alley right-of-way on the east side of this project behind the building on the corner, and to require additional right-of-way be acquired or provided by RAR to create what is essentially an oversized alley. You'll see from the drawings that it is not a typical alley. It's an unusual circumstance. The graphic that I've got on the overhead is one provided by the engineer for RAR that indicates truck turning movements could be accommodated with parking being retained on Scott Street on the east side. It does require relocating the access onto Scott Street a little bit further north than the drawing that the Planning Commission saw. But that's the general proposal. One additional element is that at the end of the public alley access, the proposed approval conditions require that RAR provide a private access easement to the total rental property so they can access the area on the west side of the building as well. And I think with that, I'll open myself to your questions. Before I do that, let me note that these actions only require a majority of the council. I did research that with Ms. Sansala, who's with us today, because we have some text in our code that may be at variance with state statute, and we'll be following up with that. But this is a request to zone from commercial to industrial, so it only requires a simple majority.
Questions? Council Lehman.
Well, it seems to me like I really don't like the transportation route here at all. looks like we're trying to throw straws at this thing to make it work. I know county is difficult, but if we can go back to the access on 69, I also don't believe that access is gonna be wide enough. We're gonna have to make that access wider.
So you're referring to the westerly access?
Yep, what's the width of that access, do you know?
I do not recall. Mr. Tice, do you recall? That would be on the east side.
That's 30 feet, Michael.
It is 30 feet.
And the parking to the left and right of that access is for employee
It
parking?
is for this proposed project.
For employee parking, right?
I assume so, or customers, if there happen to be customers that visit the site.
Boy,
And the calculation for those spaces is based on the standards contained in the zoning code.
30 feet doesn't seem very wide for a semi-movement.
I think that's pretty typical for what we've seen, for example, in Valley Green over the years. Maybe Mr. Loning wants to comment as
Well,
well.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilor Lehman, that will be a private drive, and their engineers should have looked at turning movements so that the vehicles can get in. My understanding is that access, which is formerly Pierce Street, it's all been vacated. There was a previous action to vacate that. That truck traffic will enter the site from that access point, and then will exit to the access point on Scott. So making the left turn off of 69, which is 5 lanes now, should not be a problem, I don't believe. And they should have looked at their turning movements so that the trucks can make that turning movement around their corner and to get into their dock area. So that's something, that's all private. It looks like to us, I mean, we've told them they should be looking at their truck turning movements for their site.
Well, let me continue, Mayor. The average road in Shakopee used to be 44 feet, narrowed them down to 37, and we can watch semis all day going up and down curbs. So, a little concerned on that end. On the other end, how many trucks are we going to have going back and forth through this private alley or city alley?
That I'm not sure I've got the specific answer to. Jesse, do you recall how many trucks you were anticipating for this operation?
Mr. Tice, you're gonna have to come up here. I'm sorry. You might as well say hi, introduce yourself, sign
your
in,
name.
all that stuff.
What we're talking about is about 8 trucks a day of malt that would be delivered by bulk truck trailer from the RAR facility. And as far as pickups, there might be as many as 12 a day. That's what's projected right now.
So 12
Most
and
of those
8 or
trucks
12
that are-
total?
Most of those trucks that are leaving are, less than a full, typically they're not semis. We show them as semis because that's from a planning standpoint, that's probably our worst case scenario. But a lot of these can be smaller, less than a full load truck,
So you have 8 delivering and 12 picking up?
probably about that number.
Okay, so we've got 20 trucks per day.
Yep.
Okay, so my question for staff is on Scott Street, when the turning movement to the south on Scott tears up the street and we redo Scott Street, the assessment's gonna be picked up by the fronting properties for the improvement on Scott Street.
Mayor, members of the council, that street needs improvement today.
Right, but we wouldn't make it concrete today if this project wasn't happening.
Well, we'd reconstruct the street, and those trucks will be empty, I believe, won't they, for the most part, the bigger trucks?
Yeah, the bigger trucks would be empty at that point.
The smaller trucks would be loaded. So we probably would have to build to a heavier section just to accommodate loaded trucks. But we would use our standard assessment policy.
Except the cost of the project to be more.
It could be a little bit more. And that's something, when we do that project, we'll have to look at those costs and see how we want to do a typical assessment, and the city picking up the extra. Typical residential street is 7-ton design. This would probably have to be a 9-ton or 10-ton design, so we'd have to probably pick up some extra cost. Or assess it to benefiting property owners, however we can do that. But that's a future project that we'd have to look at.
The first time I saw this project, last time we discussed it, the footprint of the building was smaller. We were talking about a potential of light industrial use, and I was hoping that you'd be able to go around the building and come back out up to 69. Now it looks like the building's much larger. That's not an opportunity to go around the building and go back to the same access point. Thus, if it was wider, you'd be able to almost make a frontage road in front of the building by 69, go around the building, come back, and go out the same way you came in. Has anybody looked at that possibility?
You know, if I could back up maybe a couple points to your questions. I apologize, I don't have the turning radiuses that we had engineered, but regarding your initial point about access to the site, those turning radiuses were calculated and demonstrated, and I don't have the drawing, but I mean, that part is pretty much covered, I think. The second thing, the point I'd make is that it was not RAR's choice to discharge traffic down the current alley and onto Scott. And that was really, as you know, a discussion that came up with the county. So that, first of all, I just say from our standpoint, that was not our preferred route of exit. But given that, and given the fact that we've had long discussions now about this exit, you know, we've tried our best to accommodate that. So with regard to that, you should know that unless we negotiate, which we are in the process of doing, the costs of upgrading that alley, I mean, RAR is gonna have significant costs to the project overall. But again, to facilitate the project, we're willing to continue to discuss this with both the city and the county. So with regard to those, you know, the current plan of discharging traffic onto Scott, I feel like I have a hard time defending that, but I mean, that's again been a position that was compromised and arrived at through discussions with both the city and the county.
Well, I would think we would both probably agree that that's probably not the best way to do this. My question is, if you could put the full picture up, Mr. Leak?
Certainly.
And I'm not a designer, so whoever put this together, would it be possible to come around this building, and the mayor can see what I'm doing here, you can't, but come around like this here and almost have an on lane to merge back in with a right out only, going like this?
Counselor,
can't see
Linder,
what
are
you're
you
doing.
talking
Right.
about alongside the
No.
east wall of the building, or what?
Through the front of the building,
Come
around the
right
front.
here and go this way,
So
and go
go,
back out this way.
explain to us better what your problem is with using Scott Street, because it is a city street that could be
It's
used
the
very
alley.
much.
You're gonna put all this traffic right around the corner of a business that sits right here that utilizes doors on both sides, and it's really gonna hurt that business.
How so?
Well, they've got a door right here and they've got two doors right here, and it only takes 2 trucks to block them doors.
We need to get you your own personal document camera.
Yeah.
At the stoplight, there's, 2 semis back, and you're blocking these doors here, one stage in the alley, and you're blocking that one, and that business is stopped.
Well, we know there's not going to be that many trucks coming in and out of there to be
I'm-
blocking traffic long
Right.
enough to impact business.
RAR is a successful business, and they're a good business, don't get me wrong, I'm not against RAR in any way. They're successful business because they drive their business. So if we're gonna sit here and say that they will never have more than that, well, then they're limiting their success. And I wouldn't wanna do that. Ideally, we should build this so that you can grow. And we're making it to the situation to where if you grow, you're harming others, and we're supposed to be making sure that doesn't happen. So I really don't like the traffic layout using an alley going around businesses like that. There's gotta be,
Counselor Lehman, can I try to see if I can understand what you had on the desk in front of you? Were you suggesting that the traffic come back around and then out somewhere along the
They-
front of the building?
well, they would have
Let
to
me
have.
answer two things about that. First is, there probably isn't sufficient space to do that, given the site that they're working with.
They'd have to shrink the building or move it back a little bit.
Shrink the building, move it back, and there are some great issues related to this site that they would run into by moving it back. And I understand the concern about the potential for increased traffic. We're always thinking about that, both at the city council and the staff level. However, based on the information that we have, it seems highly unlikely that you'd get a truck that's loaded up here, which are the 12 trucks that Mr. Tice had referred to, that would then find their way out to Scott Street and decide for some reason to stop there rather than continue with their journey. So given that it's 12 of those trucks, 8 of the other trucks, it seems pretty unlikely that you'd have those kind of conflicts. And in terms of the turning radiuses, again, not an engineer or a traffic engineer, but that's why we requested this. They used a fairly conservative turning radius, assuming a full semi, and that supposedly, from the appearance of it, demonstrates that they could make that turn out here without actually interfering with the access to those 2 bay doors or the parking on the east side. Not to say that the parking for that business that you're referring to will not change, but I would venture to say that business is using areas that are not theirs for parking in ways that may or may not be legal today. And if you're trying to accommodate what they're currently doing, that might be problematic too.
Well, I'm sure it's legal to get in their garage doors, is it not?
They're parking on other property though.
But my concern is blocking the garage doors.
And again, my comment to that is, there wouldn't seem to be a reason for those trucks, once they're loaded, to stop in front of those garage doors rather
There's
than
a stoplight on
continue.
First and Scott Street that's gonna make them stop because it'll be red.
Well, they'll have to stop to make a turning movement, certainly, but that's a relatively temporary condition.
Council Whiting?
Just a couple follow-ups with that, then a question. I think there's plenty of apron in front of the other business you're talking about. It looks like we have accommodated a little bit by making, is that for the truck traffic to make it wider on that turning radius, that swing around, that's changed this alley
That's the reason why
configuration?
the access, rather than going straight east, now on this graphic is shown moving a little bit
It's
to
for
the
the truck
north.
traffic, not for the other business.
Right.
Okay.
And actually, that was to accommodate Mark
Little bit of
Hauser's
both.
concern with regard to that turning
Okay.
radius.
So
And-
that is still city property or the right-of-way for the alley?
Under the proposed plat, it would be right-of-way given the city, and it would be a public alley. When Mr. Tice talks about the change that was made, the turning movement when this proposed alley came straight out would have required that there be no parking on the east side, and this business is using street parking for some of its vehicle staging. By moving it northward, that turning movement can be accommodated without making this no parking.
You know, I agree, I don't like this configuration. I go back to our scale Legos training and how Scott County wants to limit some of the access points on these county roads, so I understand it, and I follow their way of thinking, and don't always like it, and when we have in a developed area, it doesn't always work well for us. But I think this is another situation where we've compromised. I do have a question, though. Can you swing back over to the building again?
Certainly.
You have some fence and wall configurations here on the back, and it looks like there's some gaps in the fence. And I was just curious about those. Is that gonna be a full length of fencing there? And the reason I ask, you know, this just happened to me at my business this week. When you got a big building up, people decide that they're gonna pull behind there and dump. And so I just had a big pile of rubbish dumped behind my building. And my concern is that we end up with stuff dumping down that ravine into the river bottoms down there. Now, I guess my question is is that gonna be fully fenced off, or are you gonna provide security for the back of that? Or are you gonna maintain cleaning that up, I guess?
Well, I guess the key is that, again, we're gonna be responsible for our property. And the drawing as it's shown right now, to my belief, does not show any fence. It's not required on the retaining wall. So we don't have a perimeter fence around that right now.
I thought I saw a little sign that said fence on there.
I think there was one at one point, if it's required, based on the height of the retaining wall, we may have to fence it. But
Okay.
technically, I think our first blush, and again, I apologize because these drawings are evolving.
Right.
We did not indicate that we were gonna need a fence, but if that in fact does become a prerequisite, we'd have to follow up with that.
But in the end, if stuff gets dumped, RAR will be taking care of that and
In
maintaining
the
that.
end, we're gonna maintain that property in a much better state than it currently is by far.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Luce?
I like the layout. I agree with you. It's gonna be a lot better than it was and very much better than it is right now. It's in a very sad state right now, but that's been made that way. The turning is a little bit questionable, but if your engineers say it can be done, I'm in agreement. I think down the road, you're gonna expand more and that won't be a problem.
Well, the comment is that I would make is that this project has been extremely difficult. And to be honest with you, I have the contractor with me here, and he probably doesn't want to hear this, but we've redrawn this site about 5 times. We've spent almost $50,000 to $60,000 on drawings alone. And I'm not prepared to say that we're not going to keep trying, but it's getting rather difficult for this thing to go forward. So when you say shrink the building and you say do this or do that, that's not going to happen. This is pretty much it. So.
Other questions or comments? Councilor Mokel?
I just want to say, Jesse, thanks for bringing this to Shakopee. And I know that you've had a lot of trouble trying to get this done, and the changing to the alleyways, maybe isn't perfect, but I think we've come a long way, so thanks.
Councilor Luce?
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad they're doing what they're doing, and I think if problems do arise in the future, we'll work them out. They've generally been easy to work with, and, let's move forward.
Councilor Lehman?
What's the width of this alleyway, the new alleyway?
It's 30 feet.
Total 30 feet.
And that's something again, there's nothing standard about this. This is kind of a new territory in a sense, because most of our alleys are only 12 feet wide. So we're looking at two-way traffic here, because cars could come in, I believe, into the other parking lot, so that's why we want to maintain that width. And I just want to point out, the other option that we looked at is move that whole driveway way to the north off of the alley, which really would cut into trees and environments, and we didn't feel that was acceptable.
Will this alley be one way
No, you could have two-way traffic
up to the RAR property?
up to the RAR property.
And members of the council, I might comment that as a part of that discussion, depending on how this area develops and/or redevelops over time, there may be some potential in the future that that alley no longer needs to be public. That's an issue that you deal with if that comes forward, but the thought was that providing for a public alley, there were some benefits. 30 feet, as Bruce indicated, is far different than any alleyway that you see in Shakopee. They're 16 feet, maybe 12 feet in width in some areas, about the size of a cartway. So it's a unique circumstance, and unfortunately, that is what you encounter when you're attempting to do a project in what is essentially a redevelopment of an area that's previously been developed.
Mr. Loney?
Just one more comment I'd like to add, Mayor, members of the council, Council Lehman, there will be no parking if we have to post it that way, we will.
The alley.
The alley, yeah, it's just, it's not, when you talked about a 44-foot wide street, that's parking on both sides and the street width, so this is wide enough for two-way traffic and with no parking.
Councilor Lehman?
Well, I want to make it clear that, I think RAR is a good, productive business in our community. so don't get me wrong on that respect. But my job is to look at this and try to make it better for the whole community, if possible. Granted, it's not always possible because of constraints outside of our jurisdiction, namely Scott County in this case, with access. But it doesn't hurt to try. It doesn't look like we're gonna get anywhere doing that. It's unfortunate, because, you know, we could make it better, but, you know, you gotta work with what you got. It's just, kinda scary.
All right, do we have a motion? Counselor Mokel.
I'll make a motion for resolution number 7560, a resolution of the City of Shakopee, Minnesota, approving the preliminary and flat plat for RAR First Edition, a conditional use permit for overheight structures, and a rezoning from highway business B1 zone to heavy industrial I2 zone for property located north of First Avenue, south of Spring Street, west of Scott Street, and east of Clay Street.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Counselor Luce. Any discussion? Counselor Whiting.
Just want to point out, you know, we had a lot of discussions. You know, I went down and talked to Mr. Tice and had a great tour of the facility a while back, and I appreciate that. You know, this might not be everybody's ideal image of Western First Avenue, but right now this is a good option. You know, it's the first one that's ready to build and move down there. So, you know. We tried to keep those properties on the eastern side of the build a little more set off for future development, but in the end it couldn't be done. So I appreciate the time that you've put in trying to make this happen, and I'm willing to support it. So thank you.
Counselor Lehman.
Before we vote, let's since we've got them all here, the contractor and RAR, I don't suppose you have any front building elevations proposed with you, which might be able to show the community what the building might look like from 69?
Well, there's one in the packet.
Well, you can't show yours.
Not much, yeah.
I think Mr.
That
Meek
was
has
it.
them.
I don't know that I'm the one you wanna show, the one that shows both sides. I could show it next, during the public hearing on the 31st, I think that would be exciting to see, something to look forward to.
Michael might
Yes,
have
I
it.
think.
I did see that, yeah.
With that respect, you know, we did produce a rendering that shows the view looking west, and I think most people have seen that. The key is that it also incorporates the new tech center and pilot brewery that's going to be built at the C.H. Carpenter site. And it is a rendering that shows that view to the west, and I apologize that I don't have that. But with regard to the building exterior on the warehouse, we've gone to great lengths to select a contractor who's going to try to incorporate design elements that we currently have in the new building that we've done, the new main office renovation that we've done just a few years ago. But we're going to incorporate those elements in both the tech center, pilot malt, pilot brewery, and the new warehouse. So we do have some embellishments beyond a standard warehouse kind of facade. And with that, again, I apologize I don't have that rendering, but we can certainly make that available.
And to echo Councilor Lehman's statements, it will look great when it's all done. And I can't be more excited about this is the first step of many for RAR, and it's a wonderful project for not only the eastern end of 101 as it goes through town, but also for the entire community. It's going to be a great, great thing. So we'll get that next time we get. So thank you on March 31st. So we're still in discussion. Any further discussion? Councilor Luce.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Jesse and his staff. Thanks for sticking with it. It's been can't say it with the Cub Scouts here, so it's been a mess. And hopefully, you know, it's going to all get better. We're going to get it done. And thank you all.
Anything else?
The council, I do believe that we have copies of the elevations that Mr. Tice referred to. We'll send them out by email in advance, and then you can talk about them if you want to at the next meeting.
Thank you, sir. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jesse.
Now, Mr. Tice, now I'm open for that tour.
All right.
The Hops Factory now.
Well, I was invited to a tour after the planning commission took it up, and I said I'd rather wait until afterward.
All right, 10F1, IT Strategic Plan Recommendations. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. This agenda item before you tonight is to some extent close the loop on a study that the council approved last fall, and that was to do a strategic planning effort for our IT division. During the budget process in the late summer and fall and winter, we talked about the need to expand the city's IT staff, which is currently stands at 2 people, and just to take a fresh look at how we provide for the IT needs of the city and its various departments. The results of that study, which was conducted by a firm called LBL Technology Partners out of Minneapolis, were distributed to the council members. And if I could, I'd like to really briefly highlight some of the key recommendations of the study. I would divide the key recommendations into 3 areas. They are staffing, network structure, and governance, or how we make our IT decisions here at the city of Shakopee. And I'm going to tackle them in that order and then ask you to take consider some action on the staffing item, because I believe that comes first before we can successfully tackle the other recommendations. As I mentioned, the city has currently a 2-person IT staff, and that would basically consist of these 2 positions here. An IT coordinator that manages our network and our servers and to some extent the behind-the-scenes things, and an IT specialist that does our desktop support and helps all of our various city employees when they encounter problems with their desktop machine or a printer or a scanner or something like that. The recommendation is that we add 2 positions to the IT staff and that we transfer 2 existing positions within the city structure and make them part of the IT department. The adds would be to add an IT director. Currently, the IT coordinator and the IT specialist both report to me as the assistant city administrator. So the recommendation is that we add an IT director and that we add a second IT specialist, have that person focus specifically on the police and fire departments. They are our 2 largest departments here in the city organization and have significant IT needs all on their own. And then the second recommendation is that we transfer the position of GIS specialist and telecommunications coordinator into this newly formed IT department. Currently, our GIS specialist is housed in the engineering department and reports to the public works director / city engineer. The telecommunications coordinator is part of our administration department and also reports to me as the assistant city administrator. My recommendation to you tonight is that we start moving on bringing on board the 2 additional staff people, and specifically that IT director position, and that we look at the reassignment of these 2 positions as a possible phase 2 once we have a director in place that could actually supervise that transition and coordinate the workload amongst these different individuals. So in your packet tonight is a proposed job description for the position of IT director, and a request that you approve that job description and place it on the city's non-union pay plan so that we can begin hiring.
Councilor Lehman.
Okay, Mayor, the first question is, I actually agree with what you're proposing here, but my question is, so will the IT specialist, police, fire still be housed in, let me back up. Some of these positions will be housed in different areas, but their report will be as outlined.
It's my goal to try to find a place within one of our existing city buildings where they can all have a home base together so that they grow as a team and function as a department that backs one another up when we have absences or temporary vacancies in any of the positions. That being said, they spend a significant amount of their time away from their home base desk or cubicle and out and about working on our equipment in the various buildings that we have.
well, right now your GIS person is in engineering building,
Correct.
and your police fire IT specialist is in the police department,
We do not have a police
Don't
and
have
fire IT specialist
Okay.
currently.
and your telecommunications person, coordinator is located where right now?
Here in City Hall.
Okay. So, where would the police and fire person be located?
Like I said, it is my goal. We're a little bit tight for space, but I'm hoping to find a configuration where we can provide a home base for all of them. Most likely here in the basement of City Hall is kind of the leading contender right now, where we have the physical space that we could put a division of this size. We do have a workspace in the server room at the police station, which would provide kind of a secondary home base and working position. But again, it's always my goal when I look at the structure of our staff, if we can, to house people in the same department together. I think it builds that team functionality, and it also allows them to back one another up and understand what one another are working on, and I think it benefits the organization overall.
Other questions? All right, motion?
I got a
You have
couple
something else?
other things.
Okay.
So that was the staffing part of the
Oh, sorry.
of the
I was
report.
jumping ahead.
A little bit.
Sorry.
That's okay. There are two other components or major areas that the report provided us with recommendations for. And these are recommendations I want to make you aware of. I wouldn't expect that we would be able to make significant progress on them until we tackle this subject and the staffing issues. The first one is related to our network structure, and that is that they're recommending that we completely segregate all of our police data and IT functions into their own network. Currently, we are heavily segregated, but there are still a couple of common touch points in our IT system where police data and non-police data are stored side by side. And for security purposes, and given the high sensitivity of that police data, their recommendation is that we continue to work towards absolute segregation. The second recommendation that has to do with our network structure has to do with what we call disaster recovery. In the last, I'm going to say 5 years, the city has invested significantly in disaster recovery with an emphasis on backing up and storing and protecting our information, our files, our data. So if we were to experience some sort of IT disaster, we would have secondary copies that are up to date, not 6 months old or something, but from, say, last night or earlier today. We would have that data available and it could be restored. What we do not have is a secondary system to actually restore it to. So we would be out purchasing certain equipment, borrowing certain equipment, trying to network it all together to get access to that data that we had protected and backed up and set aside. So the secondary recommendation is that we shift our investment in disaster recovery at this point. We're doing pretty well on protecting and backing up the data, but shift it so that we can actually bring a functioning network back up more quickly than we could today. So that's the two network structure recommendations. And finally, there are two recommendations that relate to governance. And I would say both of them are simply related to growth and going from a small two-person IT department serving a smaller city to this larger IT department and serving the city that we have become today. The first is that we have an IT steering committee that really weighs in on the priority order of our IT investments and brings a broader perspective to that decision making. And the second is that we go to written business cases for our IT investments. Currently, those decisions within our allocated budget are largely made verbally by myself as the supervisor and the two IT staff having weekly staff meetings. And they get quotes and we talk about the pros and cons and the needs of the department, and we make a decision and move forward. And they're really recommending to us that as we move to this larger structure, there will be a need to formalize those into a more written form and do less of our decision-making process verbally than what we currently do now. So I've reviewed these recommendations with our existing IT staff. We are all in agreement that they're strong, valid recommendations and things that we'd like to see the city pursue. Some will have costs. I would anticipate we will bring some of those forward as part of the conversation about the city's 2016 budget. But again, the focus and the request right now is that we be allowed to move forward with the 2 additional staff people so that we have the people power to actually move forward and do the other recommendations. The city's 2015 budget did include funding for 2 additional full-time IT staff people. The action in front of you tonight is to approve the draft job description for IT director. And we would be back with a second draft job description for the IT specialist, police and fire, at one of your next couple of meetings.
Other questions? Councilor Luce?
I think it'd be prudent that we would wait with the IT director until we get a city administrator so that they can hopefully mesh. You know, whoever we hire for administrator should have some input in an IT director.
But I think if we're gonna do this structure, they would report to Chris, not to the city administrator. Is that correct, Chris?
That's a good question, and it's somewhat interrelated with our next agenda item. The recommendation of the consultant, and I noted this in my staff memo, is that the IT director report directly to the city administrator. However, you have a subsequent report in front of you on the broader organizational structure of the city that states that our city administrator, as is, has too many direct reports, and that the council should look at reducing those number of direct reports. So the 2 reports kind of conflict and work against one another. Knowing our structure at this point, it would be my recommendation that the IT director report to the assistant city administrator.
And the 2 reports were done in a vacuum from each other. The IT report was not done with the full knowledge that we're reorganizing and planning on that at some point. Is that accurate or no?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Councilor Whiting?
Yeah, I'm not, regarding your comment on the city administrator, the new city administrator, I'm not so sure that this position, I think it's more of a job related in getting the IT stuff together rather than that process that the new city administrator will need to create that bond and that vision and things. I think there's a lot of work, just job work that needs to get done here that will keep a whole IT department going for a while. And I think the draft, the strategic technology plan was very thorough and detailed. And I know we had talked about this during the budget time, and I think we had 3 new positions at that time, didn't we, Chris?
During the preliminary budget, yes, we had funding for 3 new IT positions, and in the final budget, that was reduced to 2.
Right. So we have the 2, and with the director and the specialist, I think moving around to some people, I think that's a good fit. So,
Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, I think even if we look at our next agenda item with our structuring and hypothetically had this IT director reporting to the assistant city administrator, there's no guarantee that that position doesn't change. So, you know, you could have an assistant that moves on to greener pastures or whatever, and you end up replacing that position, and you have this position now reporting to somebody new in a new position. So I don't know that we can get away from that. You know, whether we wait or not, we're looking at a job description and we're approving a job description. I don't know that the job description is going to change any. So
Are you starting to make a motion?
no, I'm not opposed to what we're doing here. You know, I'm not in a big hurry to do it. I understand what the needs are and stuff, but I don't, I'm not gonna let potential changing positions, throw me.
Councilor Luce?
My preference would be to the police and fire specialist before the director. I think the need is greater. The security aspect that you spoke about, I know is very high nowadays, and you know, we've got only 2. That would give us a third. It would take the workload and balance it out a little bit. Director, I know we need one, but at this point, what the heck, we're overloading Chris. Let's give her some more.
Counselor Whiting.
I'm gonna go ahead and make the motion to approve the attached position descriptions for IT director, authorize its placement in grade 10 of the non-union pay plan, and direct staff to proceed with filling the position.
I'll second.
Second by Counselor Mokel. Discussion. Counselor Lehman.
Mayor, I have to think that the IT director is pretty important if you're gonna have 5 direct reports underneath that position. There's just not, it's just not gonna work to have the assistant city administrator overseeing all of these plus whatever else. So, the IT director position is pretty important.
Agreed.
Any further discussion? Counselor Whiting.
Chris, was all the action you wanted stated in that motion?
Yes, it was for tonight. As I stated, we would be back at an upcoming meeting, I anticipate fairly shortly, with a second job description for the police and fire specialist.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously, is that correct? Okay. Moving on to 10F2, organizational restructuring. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
It's green.
It's green. I was gonna say it too, and I'm like, I beat me.
Ooh, it's very green up there. It wasn't quite that green on my screen. All right. Mr. Mayor and council members, this is a similar agenda item in that it deals with the organizational structure of the city. This one, not just a single division or function area like IT, but with the organization overall. The council will remember that about 6 weeks ago tonight at your first meeting in February, you received the results of an organizational study conducted for the city by Springstead. Mr. David Unmacht was here and walked the council through his findings and several possible scenarios for an organizational structure for the city. And I want to bring you back to that conversation tonight and see if we are ready to make some decisions and start taking some actions to bring this about. I'm going to plagiarize blatantly from Mr. Unmacht's report here. So several of these items up here are direct quotes from the report. He started off his report reminding us that a redesign or a reorganization of a city is really designed to do one or more of 3 things. And in some cases it is more, it's all 3. The first is to increase coordination and integration of services. Secondly would be to combine similar functions. And the third would be to alter the span of control environment or the number of direct reports or the scope of any one supervisor or department head. In doing so, it is the goal that the reorganization will accomplish one or more of these things. It will improve integration and coordination of work that share functional areas, and we'll be talking more in a moment about some of those functional areas that have a lot of overlap. Rectify situations where the span of control is unequal or inconsistent. Provide a consistent focus on community, organizational, and strategic issues. Repair existing structures which do not meet current expectations, standards, or trends. And enhance the level of organizational consistency, whether it be in policy, operation, or the culture of the city organization. The findings that Mr. Unmacht presented in his report regarding our current structure included, he gave our current structure the label of being a very traditional design of a city organization, with each major function reporting directly to the city administrator. The current organizational structure has 10 direct reports to the city administrator. Ideally, this number would be between 6 and a maximum of 8. And to illustrate that, you've seen this before. We talked about the existing organizational structure of the city. So the city administrator position is here, reporting directly to the city council. Currently there are 10 direct reports. These 7 department heads, plus a management analyst, an administrative assistant, and the city's economic development coordinator. And that evening in February when we talked about this, I had added to the remarks of the consultant that it's a little bit misleading when you show the city administrator here with one line up. The city administrator has essentially 5 bosses or people that they report to in each of you, the need to communicate regularly with each member of the city council and so on, as well as numerous other outward relationships and communications that need to be maintained on a day-to-day basis. And I've just listed on here some of those that come to mind immediately. The city attorney, scale, and the various committees and activities that go along with that, interaction with residents, community groups, intergovernmental relations, lots of interaction with Scott County, the school district, neighboring cities, and so forth. So that's a full plate. That's a lot of people to meet with, talk to, understand what's going on, and keep things moving forward. These are a couple more notes from Mr. Unmacht. The more direct reports to the administrator, the more the individual has to spend time on department or functional specific activities. It is recommended that the city administrator focus his or her time on the city council relationships, organizational priorities and strategies, and external collaborations and community relations. I thought it was interesting, Mr. Unmacht had created his report without having seen the posting that the city council approved for your city administrator advertisement. But if you pull up that posting, it talks about a lot of these exact same things. City council relationships, organizational priorities, external collaborations, getting to know the community, and so forth, as being the priorities that this council has for the next city administrator. And lastly, he noted that the larger the city of Shakopee becomes, the greater the expectations in what I call these up and out relationships. At the same time that the organization lower in the structure also demands more. Mr. Unmacht presented 4 possible new structures for the council's consideration that evening that he was here. All involve some degree of consolidation, and all result in fewer direct reports to the city administrator. I included each of those 4 organizational charts in your packet for this evening, and I have them up here if you would like me to put any, one or more of them up as you discuss the items. For the sake of moving the conversation forward, I'm going to recommend that the City Council consider what was presented largely as option 1. And that looks pretty much like this. This approach consolidates the administrative support functions, finance, human resources, information technology, facilities, maintenance, communications, and the city clerk's office into one larger unit here reporting to the assistant city administrator. And simultaneously on the other side of the organization charts, it consolidates the development and infrastructure functions of the city, or aggregates like functions into one department and reporting to one person. So this is kind of a traditional organization chart way of looking at it, and I created a couple other images that I think help explain at least how I think about it. When you look at our development and infrastructure functions today, it looks very much like this. It's a series of boxes. We have building and planning both reporting to the community development director, engineering and public works, and now natural resources to the public works director, and you also have an economic development coordinator. It would be my suggestion that a more ideal organization structure looks less like a group of silos and boxes and more like a circle or a team. Mr. Unmacht notes in his report as advantages of option number 1 that in a growing and developing city like Shakopee, it's really important that these functions work together. I think the project that you just saw in front of you from RAR Malting is a case in point. We have spent countless hours in meetings with each of these areas represented in those meetings, trying to work out all of the various issues, reach compromise, find a project that can be moved forward. So that's what I have prepared at this time. Looking for council's discussion and feedback. If you are interested in going further down the recommended structure, we can talk a little bit more about what that would cost. I have some rough estimates available and so on.
Councilor Lehman.
Can you put your recommended flow chart back up there? There you go. So if I was to move the fire chief position and the assistant city administrator position, just the locations,
Mm-hmm.
and then had the administrative assistant beat off from the city administrator and the assistant city administrator off to the side, would that be the same?
I don't think anybody has any idea what you just said.
Say it again.
If what I'm trying to get at, and I had this conversation with Chris before, is really you've got the assistant city administrator right below the city administrator, and you've got the executive assistant, administrative assistant working for both city administrator and the assistant administrator.
We do. In practice, currently, this person, Edna Nicholas, our wonderful administrative assistant, she supports the city administrator and the assistant city administrator, as well as the divisions that report up to the assistant city administrator. On paper, on that job description, it reports officially to the city administrator. That's who that person goes to for their time off and their time card approval and those kind of day-to-day operational things. But this person very much supports these positions. There are administrative assistants in each of these departments and many of these divisions. I didn't show them each on here. I showed that specifically because a focus of the conversation is about the number of direct reports to the city administrator.
Mayor, the reason I bring it up is because of the position we find ourselves in right now, okay? If it wasn't, we don't have a city administrator, we have a city assistant acting as the capacity, and so it's important that that administrative assistant works with both the city administrator and the assistant, because administrator might go on vacation, the assistant is now in charge, has to have a pretty good working relationship to just keep the status quo moving in the city of Shakopee. So that's, I just want to make sure that it doesn't show that here, but if that's the way it is, that I'm comfortable with that.
It is the way it functions, yes.
Other questions? Councilor Whiting.
Just curious on here, we have a park maintenance. Is that gonna fall under Public Works then?
It does today, and it would
Still
continue
does,
to,
okay.
yes. Mr. Mayor, if I could add one thing that I neglected to mention in my opening comments, and just sort of anticipating a question. There may be the question of why now? We are in a significant period of transition currently here at the city, and why make moves like this now? And it's in many ways because we are in a significant period of transition, and we're trying to make hires where we can to move the organization forward and keep things on track. You just approved a job description for this position. We are in second round interviews for this position. And so specific to those two, exactly where they fit in the overall structure is a very relevant question for us right now. So that's my answer to what I would anticipate would be a question of why now.
Other questions? Is that a question? Okay, Councilor Luce. I didn't know if you were just stretching or what you were doing there.
We're gonna have to do some of this soon. We know one of our heads is leaving, has not given their notice, but made it known. And no one is gonna fill that job with one person ever again. That's gonna be a two-person job, and we might as well get used to the fact that development and infrastructure is gonna take one person just to do what that other person does pretty much now. So the chart shown in front of me, in front of all of us, was one that worked for me the best.
I have two questions and two major points of concern with this. One is more of a question as to Parks and Recreation. Why is Parks and Rec direct report to city administrator when everywhere else is not? Wouldn't that fit under development and infrastructure, since there's park dedication and other things, why wouldn't it fit in that category?
That's an excellent question, and you will find this notion of doing a Department of Development and Infrastructure. Some places call it physical development, some places call it assets, and I've seen a couple different names for it. But the concept is one that several cities in the metropolitan area have been moving to over the last 18 to 24 months, I would say, and some have had for quite a while. And you will find parks specifically in that department in some places. Because we already have park maintenance here within Public Works, and because our existing Parks and Recreation Department has a very strong recreation focus, which is a direct customer service delivery of services to our residents, in the operation of the community center and the ice arena and the aquatic park. It's my feeling at this point that we not bite that off at this time. I think if you had this up and running well and you had these various positions in place, in the future, if something became vacant or there was a reason or a significant change in the workload or the emphasis of that department, that's certainly a very logical question to ask at this point. I think this is the logical next step from where we stand today, is to move here. And it doesn't mean to say that we'll be in this structure, you know, into eternity, but for our next phase, as our next step moving forward from where we are today. I think the heavy recreation focus of our existing department makes it unlike these other departments
Okay.
in several ways.
All right, that makes sense. I understand that it's kind of an outlier for everything else. I'm just trying to figure out, that leads into my next question as to, I'm kind of concerned with finance being not direct report to city administrator. And in minimizing those number of reports to the city administrator, flipping those two around in some way would make me feel better about it. But I'm just concerned with the finance not reporting directly to the administrator.
Understand, and that is something that Mr. Unmock noted for the council when he presented the reports, that some people might be uncomfortable with that. The reason, and you can certainly, you know, this is my recommendation for you to consider, but this is the council's decision, so you can certainly make that change. The thinking in my mind behind making this recommendation and structuring it the way it is that notion of grouping like functions and services together, and the goal of bringing about a common culture and approach to the way business is done. And I think finance fits very much with human resources and information technology. Each of those three functional areas of the city would never exist in and of themselves. They exist to facilitate the carrying out of these other services. The customers for these folks are everybody else on the organization chart. And the focus again, in these areas is administrative support services. And I'd like to see those divisions function with that common culture and that common mentality and approach to their work. That, you know, we don't exist to have a world-class IT department. Our IT department we hope to make world-class because it makes our police, fire, public works, and parks and recreation departments better, and it makes the services that we deliver to our residents more effective and efficient. That's the goal. And I think finance fits in with that piece. That being said, there's a completely logical argument of why you would pull finance out.
You sold me. I'm good.
So
I had the same concern, and Chris and I talked about it a little bit too, because the one thing she had said is it's not like she's going to tell the finance. The finance will still have that contact with the other departments. So,
Councilor Lewis was first.
I believe when we hire a new city administrator, they may have some input into this, and you know, if they feel a little more comfortable having a direct report from the finance director, I think we could support that.
Councilor Lehman.
I at first wanted to have the finance separate directly to the city administrator, but then it dawned on me that problem with looking at this is it doesn't say under finance that you have a finance director, but you do. Okay, and if you keep that in your mind as you look at this, if the council or the administrator wants to go to the finance director, they can do that. So I would be more concerned about not having a finance director and just having a finance department than I would of where the box is located.
Correct.
So that kind of put me at ease on that one.
Correct. Mr. Mayor and council members, the intent here is that you have a strong subject matter expert in each of these areas who is both a manager and a leader within their division and their functional areas. These two positions here really serve to marshal all of those resources towards the end goal of the city and direct that culture and priority and theme part of the work that needs to take place.
Councilor Whiting.
You know, at this point in stage of the game with the new city administrator coming online, I'd prefer at this time to minimize the number of direct reports, get them acclimated, fitting in. You know, at one time I talked about the fire and the police together, but at this size of the city we're in, and that's not going to fit the way we do business now. But this model does work well and minimizes that and lets him get acclimated moving forward. And if he does decide to change things in the future, wants more of a direct report, he can either take that line automatically by contacting those people.
He?
Sorry. He or she.
Just
yes.
checking.
Yep. They could take that line, because they can take that line with any of these, managers and supervisors and things. So, I'm comfortable with this model.
My
Next steps.
last question on it is that I'm assuming that this is just the concept and this is not the way all the names will end up being and that kind of stuff, or is this where you want it to end up being?
Would be what I would call a functional organization chart. You could put different titles, on here. We could have an economic development coordinator, public works superintendent, specific job titles. Right now, it was intended to get the functional parts grouped together in an intended way.
I just meant mostly like development and infrastructure. If that is a development and infrastructure director or whatever that is, if that's all yet to be determined exactly what that's going to be, or this is what it is.
The development and infrastructure title would be my recommendation. So you're likely looking at a director of development and infrastructure.
Okay.
Do you need a motion,
did you-
Chris?
Yeah, Mayor, I'm sure that if we took what's in front of us and we start making the lines under each box, it's gonna be pretty big. And I think what we're looking at here is just the potting of various things. If you open up each one of these boxes, there's a great big thing inside of it that's got a lot of little areas to it.
Did we need a motion?
Yeah.
Yes, but if we might talk a little bit about what I would see as the next steps and see if the council is in agreement with that as the next steps. As I said, we have several vacancies on this organizational chart, and as Councilmember Luce alluded to, perhaps some additional vacancies coming up in the future. If the council's direction is to move toward this organization chart, to start taking steps to put this into place in our structure, it would be my recommendation that we start here in the development and infrastructure line, and that over here, we are gonna move forward and try to identify and hire an IT director. The finance position we have covered by an interim person currently, and that was a conscious decision to leave that position until the new city administrator is on board, and so continue down that path. One of the recommendations of the report from Mr. Unmocked was that IT and HR be given more of the city's resources given our size. I would see the addition of a human resources manager or director as being a 2016 budget conversation on that side. But for now, looking over here at the development and infrastructure side of things. So the next steps would be for me to have conversations with the staff people that currently work in that functional area, and as we play musical chairs, figure out where different people land, so to speak, and bring forward a transition plan of how we go from where we are today. I lost my little map, of all these boxes. How do we go from that to this in a way that respects the service of the people that we have here and have had here for many years, but also starts moving us proactively forward.
Questions on those? Councilor Lehman?
What's the timeline for having the building official position up to full staff?
We have narrowed the field to 3 finalists for building official, and I hope that we will be doing final round interviews next week.
So in a couple of weeks, a month maybe?
Probably a month if you look at background check and them giving notice to their current employer types of things. So certainly it's been our goal to have that position filled before we hit full force construction season.
Do we want to have that wrapped up before we dive you into this, or you want to do them side by side, or how do you want to do that?
I think the goal is to keep as many of them moving forward as we can and do them side by side.
All right, any other questions? All right, we need a motion. Anyone? Councilor
Let's see
Whiting?
if I can
I know, I was,
pull this one off here. Make a motion to direct staff to proceed with the potential improvements to the city's organizational structure and the desired direction the desired direction that we've just talked about.
As in the recommended org chart?
The recommended org chart? Yep.
All right, do we have a second?
Second,
Second by Councilor Lehman.
just going to point out that to the motion maker that it's the as recommended version in our packet.
Correct.
All right, so we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any discussion? Seeing none, all's in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much for all that work, Ms. Wilson. Now we move on to 11A, which is closed session. We're going, oh wait,
Yeah.
we're
Mr. Mayor, we have a brief
other business.
other business, and rather than go into closed session and come back to that 60-second item, the Public Works Director has a brief update for the council on something that just came up today, I believe.
I don't know how well you can see that map here, but we have a footbridge that goes across the Mill Pond. And this is Memorial Park. Parking lot over here, chamber buildings right here. And there is a footbridge across here. This was built, there's no plans that we could find. It was kind of built by some local construction people. I think at least 35 to 40 years ago. And been used mainly by snowmobiles to get across the channel over there. The DNR trail actually ends here. And through many discussions where the DNR trail will go ultimately, it's gonna go along 101, across the Mill Pond Bridge, that what we call by Dangerfield. And there's no interest in going through, we've had several discussions about the sensitivity of Memorial Park and the Indian burial grounds in that area. So, I've been waiting, I knew this bridge is not standard. It's 5 feet, it's got very little maintenance on it. It doesn't look like a healthy bridge. So I had it inspected today, and the inspectors basically came up with a whole list of things with bad decking, some bent members, potentially beams that could slide off the abutments, a whole host of things. And the recommendation is that we should close the bridge to any future public use. So that's what we intend to do tomorrow, is to start closing out that bridge and then notifying the public. So that's all I'm here to talk to you about, so, any questions?
Matt?
I remember the discussion with the DNR trail. The council specifically decided that we would not support snowmobiles going down the sidewalk over the new bridge to Memorial Park. So that route is not supposed to be the route. It's supposed to be further to the north, back around the backside. Number one. Second question would be, what's the plan for replacing this bridge?
I think that's something we'll have to take to the Park and Rec Board and see, do we want to replace the bridge?
Yes.
Okay. Cost of that'll be around $350,000 if that's what you want to do. But that's something we have to look at. There will be no DNR funding or any other sources for, it'll just be ours. Just want to point out here what Mr. Lehman is talking about. The DNR trail is going to go along 101 here. Now, and across. We have a 3-acre parcel that we bought here. And we have a utility corridor. We have our force main and sewer line right up in here. And in discussion with the DNR, there's some funding grants available to make this trail connection back to the DNR trail over here. This DNR trail actually goes back to here, where this bridge is, but it can go back into this area if people want to use this, but it's a roundabout way. There could potentially be some difficulty in rebuilding the bridge from the standpoint of sensitivity to the Indian community. I just want to point that out. That's what the discussions we've had. It's a very sensitive issue. When you say yes, build a bridge, I think we need to have further discussions and see if that's possible and the cost of that, whatever that is. So we can go forward with that, but I think for right now, we need to close the bridge for public safety.
I'll revise my statement to yes, we need to look at replacing the bridge, I feel.
Yes.
Councilor Whiting.
I would like, is there immediate need to close that bridge without reconnecting through this property we own by Dangerfields first?
I can't stand here and say that nothing's going to happen. The liability, you got a lawyer right next to you, Mr. Whiting, and she would probably be cringing if we keep that bridge open with a notification that we have that it's unsafe. That is something that is not acceptable in my mind. We can close it and people would have to, we could probably put some kind of route through here to people get back through here if they want to get back in this area here.
I'd like
This
to
is a
see-
nature area. This is basically a.
Oh, I was just down there Saturday. That
Yeah.
bridge is pretty rough, but it worked. It got me over it. But I would like to see that connection made at least, temporarily, or at least somehow, so people know that, hey, the bridge is out ahead, and that we're I don't know how you do it, but with some sort of signage, and eventually with the paved path when all the sewer work is done and you have it all figured out where it needs to go and how we're going to pay for it. But I'd like to see that first before we close that bridge.
Councilor Lehman.
Is the bridge unsafe for snowmobile use or just pedestrian? I'm trying to figure out, the level. If we barricade it off so only you could walk through it, is it safe for that? Or are we
Well-
not comfortable with that?
It's kind of like this. How unsafe is it? Probably people can still use it. But I knew once I get it inspected, it was not going to be good. It's not a standard bridge. There's a lot of defects in it that
It's old.
potentially could be unsafe. A snowmobile could actually veer off and hit a post.
Right.
There's just too many things there that are such a liability to the city that it's not worth keeping it open.
At all? Not even for pedestrian use?
I can't make that decision.
Okay,
As
so-
your
okay.
professional engineer, I can't do that.
Okay, so then my second question would be, if we're gonna look at options for replacing it, we should probably expand the options to include maybe just a pedestrian bridge or pedestrian slash snowmobile access bridge, and then you have options with different price points and whatnot.
We certainly can look at options. I'm not saying we're gonna take out the bridge right now. Because that's a cost, but we would wanna look at what are the options? Do we wanna remove and replace or just remove? Those would be the two options. And we have to look at that. What kind of design can we put in here? Is this acceptable to the other parties that may have an interest? This will not be an easy project.
Before that bridge was there, we actually had to climb the fence right by the old mill over here and hang from the fence and shimmy across. Jay might remember that.
And there used to be somewhere over here, there was a driveway across. Remember that? That's washed out at least 2 or 3 times.
And there was a
back
fence
to the
at the
end.
farmer's field on that driveway.
Councilor Luce.
I think we take our engineers' advice and we close it immediately. You know, we're just leaving ourselves very exposed. That thing could fall down tomorrow, kill somebody. We've been told it's bad.
Right.
It would not be the right way to go.
I agree with Mike.
That's all I've got on that, so.
Thank you, sir.
That's just a kind of a notice, and we'll get something in our website.
Consensus. I think there's consensus here.
Are we gonna do it here, or are we gonna do it?
We'll do it here.
Okay.
Motion for a 5-minute recess, or we can't do that yet, can we?
But we can,
Yeah, let's do 5-minute recess, and then we'll do closed session after that.
We need to read this into the,
Yeah. Motion for a 5-minute recess.
Closed session isn't gonna take very long, though, right?
no.
Closed session is gonna take a couple minutes.
Okay.
So do you wanna do a recess first, or can
Well,
we just do closed session real
Let's
quick?
just get her done.
Just sit here and wait for 5 minutes till I clear the room.
Everybody's gotta get out. All right, Counselor Whiting.
I'll make the motion to go into closed session to consider labor negotiation strategy pursuant to Minnesota statute section 13D-03.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may,
Yes?
please note for the record the time of the commencement and the place of the closed session before you go into closed session.
Okay.
Second,
Second, all right. Any discussion? Counselor Lehman.
take note of the time and location.
I was gonna do that after we voted on it.
Okay.
Is that the correct order?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all's in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passed unanimously. We're gonna go into closed session. Consider labor negotiation strategy pursuant to Minnesota statute section 13D.03 at 8:39 PM at Shakopee City Hall. And we are now in closed session.